It's so good to be here. The poem, set to music, entitled Trees, was written by Joyce Kilmer in 1886, to 1918. The pen name for Alfred Joyce Kilmer, the American soldier and poet who was sadly killed in France very close to the end of World War I. Many people know that poem, but not as many have heard the song as it was recorded by Nelson Eddy. What you listen to is a copy of the original recording produced in 1935, as purchased by my mother, who played it over and over again. From the time when I was the age of 7, it still gives me goosebumps when I hear it, for his remarkable voice, perfect diction, and obvious attachment to the song, bringing loving memories of my mother back to me. Could this song, and as it was sung then, be interpreted as my first connection to nature, instilling within my spiritual love for trees? We were a very large poor family in the Docklands area of the East End of London, in wooden houses built in the 19th century for the mass migration of workers enticed from their agricultural communities with promises of a better life working in the big city. Directly connected to the vast national expansion of the Industrial Revolution at that time. There was much love within the framework of our extended families who had coped with the First World War, the Depression, and into the Second World War. Both parents had strong principles in living with truth, loyalty, trust, compassion, understanding, which we knew was our code for survival. My childhood memories are that I was born in a dark house, in a treeless community, with cobblestone streets, alleyways, and many high brick walls to keep us out of the mysteriousness behind them, and thus control our natural curiosities of whatever went on in the docks. In 1936, our local government came out with a life-changing slum clearance for building housing project. Consequently, they moved us into other areas of the East End and beyond, and in doing this, they broke up our social network of small communities. I had just turned 11 when World War II broke out on September the 3rd, 1939. Mother obliged the government call to send all the children out of London as a means to save them from whatever was to come. In June 1940, carrying one change of clothing, 3 pennies to spend, and the regulated gas mask, we boarded a train to an unknown destination. It was on that 12-hour train ride when I felt my childhood was over. In contemplation, most military servicemen are reluctant to talk about their wartime experiences. Most children who were evacuated out of London do not care to speak of their experiences either. I was fortunate and well cared for by the people who took me in. Living in a small country village in the southern county of Devon, where we walked through the forests abundant with primroses, violets, bluebells, and much more. Oh, for the fragrances of those woods. When in season, we picked up the chestnuts, which were stored for eating as a delicacy, supplementing our meager weekly food rations. We took trips to Dartmoor to pick whortleberries, which are similar to the Canadian blueberry. Breathing the clean air cleaned up my asthmatic London fog lungs, while enjoying the trees on one hand and the open space of the moors on the other. I now cherish to recall this beautiful connection to nature at a very bleak time in my life. An acute attack of homesickness engulfed me by the time I was 13. I was reunited with my parents in 1942 to find that the family unit I had left behind no longer existed. In this sense, I suddenly became an only child. Canada, too, in its post-war era, was very short of skilled labour and sent out promotions welcoming immigrants to come and help build up their country. My husband and I left England in 1956, arriving by boat, entering through the St. Lawrence Seaway. In Montreal, we quickly caught the express train to Toronto, non-stop for 6 hours. We barely saw the places we sped by at such high speed. Though mesmerized by the miles, and I say miles, of tall, thick, unbroken forests on each side of the track. For me, these trees were the awakening to the new world. Our family of 3 children, born in Ontario, 61, 62, 64. By coincidence, I became a Unitarian Universalist just after my last child was born, who blissfully is here with me today. And a Canadian citizen in 1966. I joined the Unitarian Universalist Women's Federation in 1968, who produced excellent programs for women in self-discovery. Thus, in finding my voice, I began organizing protests for social change in Ontario, representing my church and the UUWF. From 1973 to 75, I was a board member of UniCamp, our Unitarian summer camp for children of all ages, which is situated on 50 acres in the pristine Cambrian-Shield area of southern Ontario, where I came face to face with nature in all her glory and seasons. The pond was fed and cleansed naturally by underground streams. The above-ground water we could drink. On the adjacent property, they had their own private waterfall, and graciously permitted us to walk through their forest to enjoy the falls, providing we were respectful and caring of the earth. This was a special privilege and a wonderful teaching opportunity for the children and myself in environmental stewardship. I first met Carolyn McDade at the Unitarian Universal Association annual general meeting when it was held at the Royal Hotel in Toronto, July 1973. She was then an active member of the Arlington Street Unitarian Church in Boston, Mass. We have been in contact with each other ever since. In 1997, she received the Honorary Ministry to Women Award presented by the UUA and the UUWF for the 25 years of ministering to women. By then, she was also connected to nature and focusing on the environment. We are members of the Sacred Web Society, singing with her at every opportunity, inspired by her words and music, relating to each other and the spirituality of her teachings. My daughter, husband and family moved from Ontario to Kelowna, BC in 91. We followed out west in 93. I discovered Raging Grannies at the West Coast Unitarian Universalist District Annual General Meeting held here in Vancouver in 1998, and went back home certain that the timing was right to start a gaggle of Raging Grannies in the city of Kelowna. Way back then, we were singing protest songs against Monsanto engineering our food chain. I enjoyed singing in both groups the songs written by Carolyn and the political protest songs written by the Raging Grannies. Each group raising our consciousness to heal the earth. There was a flurry of family activities in moving after my husband died in Kelowna in 2001, catching up with each other in 2006, living in North Vancouver. It was in 2009 when the David Suzuki Foundation sponsored their first public forum entitled Elders and the Environment. Raging Grannies were invited to appear and sing after David officially opened the conference. I stayed on to attend the workshops and instinctively knew that I had been and had transformed yet once again. Officially becoming an original member of the Association of Suzuki Elders in March 2010. In our work together, inspirations came from different directions, but occasionally David would send us a suggestion we could grasp and develop into a community project, emphasizing our love of nature and the healing of the planet, claiming the scientific connections to nature as well. It is within the framework of this presentation and the guidance of my life experiences, I suggest you talk to each other, to children, to teens, family, and friends. A good question I can almost guarantee to start an interesting and enjoyable conversation is simply to ask, what is your first connection to nature? Thank you.
Our connections with nature, for those of us who live in suburbia, are varied. Joy manages extensive vegetable and flower gardens in our particular corner of our townhouse complex. So she certainly has that connection. I love wandering in the woods and in the forest and seeing the mountains myself. And I find them very moving, very satisfying, and it provides me with a sense of centering whenever I have the chance to get out into the country. So let me ask you the questions as we now move into our feedback session, to think a little bit about your own experiences with nature and how these may or may not have informed your feelings about ecology. In some ways, the topic itself is preaching to the converted, since I know very few people in this congregation who would have any strong objections to this. But the question, particularly the question that I think Elizabeth has raised with us, is the question of the connection between our love of nature, our experiences with nature, and to what extent this may have impacted on our feelings for the ecology, for protecting the environment, for working towards prevention of significant climate change, and so forth and so forth. So let me put the question to you. What has been your experiences with nature, either at the present time or in the past, which you have found particularly inspiring or particularly moving? I'll take the microphone from the stand over there. I'm going to ask you, if you wish to say something, to please come forward, because the cord only stretches so far.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I can think of all sorts of things in my childhood and adulthood that have impressed me, having to do with, going out on the prairies and looking for that first crocus in the springtime. Or camping by the river and the rain coming and getting soaking wet while you're camping. But sometimes when I think about nature, I think about my experience with animals, as opposed to the plant life and the ecology. I think about that loon I heard over the lake as the sun's going down. Just inspiring. I also think about that coyote on the prairie, sort of slinking along the hill. And I'm always amazed when I find people who are frightened of the animals in our nature. So I think sometimes we focus on the plant life, but the animals are fascinating. And I think my connection is as much to the animals as to the plant life.
Thank you, Patricia. That was wonderful. Trying to choose among childhood experiences and how that influenced me. Many of you know I grew up in California, so what I had from an early age was access to the Pacific Ocean, about 45 minutes away, and access to the redwood forests, when my parents could take us there. But they were a very busy, hard-working family. We were not a camping family, but I was often invited along on those trips by my best friend's family. They did send me to Lutheran summer camp, and that again was a week in redwood forest. So even though I grew up in a suburb that was fast becoming filled with concrete, which was to eventually become Silicon Valley, it started out as one interspersed with what I guess was a monoculture, but it was fruit orchards. So in my childhood in the 50s, there were those kinds of orchards around too, and it was a very forgiving Mediterranean climate. But eventually it became very smoggy, and we became more and more conscious of freeways, and again, as I mentioned, the concrete. So when my husband and I had an opportunity to move to Vancouver in '73, originally we thought this would be a short 18-month time during his postdoctoral fellowship. But the more we stayed, and the more we found jobs that would allow us to stay, and the time came to make very clear decisions about where our children were going to grow up, we clearly opted for Vancouver and raised our kids on the North Shore. And against all odds, financially, they are still here in Vancouver, and I know that's something that is very difficult for families of our age. But by my husband's involvement in scouting with them, they both have a love of the outdoors even today. And one son needs his weekly time in the woods to keep his mental equilibrium. He talks about that, how important that is for going back to his work week, having had that time in the woods. So, whatever motivates me for my involvement in trying to preserve the environment of my adopted home, I think does go back to those feeling gratitude for those early experiences that I was privileged to have. And I try to keep that in mind when I'm choosing which causes to espouse. So, thanks again.
I've always loved nature from small. When I was very young, I can remember we were staying at the summer cottage at the German nobleman's estate, and I knew exactly where the spots were where the first spring flowers would bloom, some wild and some tended actually, snowdrops and scillas and liverwort, which you probably don't know around here, and also white anemones, and later on lily of the valley. I can remember the spots exactly in my mind, but I worry about the young people in the urban setting these days who are not close enough to nature to respect and appreciate it, and are cut off from it and fearful of it. You mention a snake or a mouse or a rat or something to anybody, and they climb on a chair at the thought of it. And that is so wrong, because everyone has their job to do. Every creature has their right to live and to do what they were assigned to do by the environment. So I think snakes are beautiful, and mice are very sweet, and I have no fear of any of those creatures. And I hope the young people are close enough to understand that, and not, the first reaction when they see a snake is to kill it. And why? Completely harmless grass snake, and it has a job to do.
That reminds me as well, Joy's coming up. Last night I was emptying the compost bucket into our compost bin and said hello to the two mice who are resident in there. And, quite beautiful little mice, nice and fat and plump. Quite enjoying themselves, I'm sure.
Thank you, John. Those mice startle me, and I give them a lot of respect. I don't hate them or really fear them, they just startle me. But so I always knock on the lid to let them know that I'm coming so that they can go back down their little tunnels. John prefers to have a chat. Anyway, my experience with appreciating nature became one of an exploration, I think, on my own. My mom and dad brought me to Canada when I was 3 after the Second World War, and they were brought up in urban environments, and I don't remember them ever initiating a walk in nature or an exploration or an explanation of anything about nature. But when I became a brownie and a Girl Guide, there were many opportunities to earn badges and learn lots of things about nature. So I learned the names of birds, the names of trees, the names of flowers, how to recognize the birds and all sorts of things. So my learning came through those 2 programs to start with. And then I lived on the edge of the forest that leads to what is now the freeway in Burnaby. And when it was not a freeway, it was just complete forest and blackberries. And I was free in those days to go and explore there on my own every weekend as a little child with my doll carriage and a package of seeds. I would go somehow buy seeds, and I thought they would grow in the forest, but of course they wouldn't because it was too shady, so I learned that. But I was always off on my own learning these kinds of things, and one day I was very startled I came upon a garter snake that had captured a big frog. And it was drawing the innards, whatever it was eating, from the frog's mouth. And I had never heard of such a thing, seen such a thing. It was just amazing, amazing learning experience. And for me, quite frightening at first. But I began to learn then about the connections, the interconnections of nature. My English family used to send me beautiful nature books and how the world began and how it evolved and stuff. And I turned the pages and turned the pages, but I couldn't really read them, and nobody read them to me. So eventually I started to learn this on my own. And one of my terrible fears is to touch the snakes and worms on the pages of these books. Couldn't do it. But when I had a child of my own, my little boy, we were planting a vegetable garden, and up came the worms. And that's when I decided to grow up. And I picked up the worms, and I handed them to Craig. And I told him how to love them, be gentle with them, and respect them and what they did in the garden. And that was my first being able to touch these things. And ever since, I've had a wonderful respect for the things in my garden, to put things in my garden. And the other piece, sort of a negative piece about my thought about the environment, is that too many of us, well, let's just put it this way. I've been to many pride parades. And I love the pride parades until I start walking toward the bus to come home. And all along the route is litter upon litter upon litter. Nothing that we can be proud of. It just made me so ill. I wrote a letter to Vancouver Sun about it, but it didn't get edited, it didn't get printed. But I would love to see everybody's business areas cleaned up every morning, that we all feel that we're in a beautiful environment because everybody cares to respect it, keep it clean. I know the birds scatter a lot of this stuff, so it's not just people. But that would be just so lovely for me, to have the world turn around and care about those things. And also to get, I wanted to mention one more thing, that because I've learned to be really gentle and respectful of nature, it's helped me to do spirit play in the way it is meant to be. Spirit play is a methodology we use in our church school with our children, where we take little objects out of a story basket and one at a time help the children anticipate what that object is going to represent in a story. But it's how you take out the pieces that touches your soul and the children's soul. You take everything out very carefully and slowly and respectfully, and you touch it. Just as you're touching things in nature, the story is to be touched as gently and respectfully. And then also you teach them how to put it back the same way so that somebody else who's going to use it later will find it put away just as nicely, and they also will do that. It takes a long time to train children to do that if it's not in your own heart. But if it's in here and you show it, you model it, they do it. And that's what I love about doing it at our church school. And I notice it's the way we use our hands, gently, slowly, respectfully. When we work with nature and with children, we teach them to slow down and love everything they're doing. I knew that piece was where I wanted to arrive at the end of what I said today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. And I would also add that that same habit that you're teaching those children about respectfully picking up the pieces and putting them back to leave things for the next. I'll be handling nature. Same lesson.
I just wanted to tell you the story of two lawns, our back lawn and our front lawn. The back lawn, about 25 years ago, I dug out the sod with much difficulty, and we put in a vegetable garden. And I've had more pleasure connecting with that than almost anything else I've done. Now, the other thing about the two lawns is we still had half a back lawn and a full front lawn. And what happened to us last year, because it had already been killed, and the bugs that got in had done their work, and then the crows, and then the skunks, and what have you got at that. So we ended up with no grass at all at the front and no grass at the back. So what we did was to have somebody come and power rake what was left, because it was just bare ground. And we managed to find sort of an odd thing called micro clover. It's a very, very fine clover, and it's not like your regular clover. It's very tiny. And we were told that if you plant this micro clover, then you'll have a good green spot that will last all summer, go yellow in the fall perhaps, come back again in the spring, and it doesn't need any nutrition because the clover creates its own nitrogen. And so we did that, and we now have two beautiful lawns at the back and the front. And so far, so good. So I just thought I'd let you know that little made natural experience. Thank you.
Thank you. An interesting parallel there, because you can say on the one hand, nature is not always a friendly thing. And certainly the sun wasn't last year. But there are other times when, as you learned, you can work with nature, work with a natural product to restore the land. So, good story.
Well, I have to say that for myself growing up, definitely nature played a very important part in connecting myself with nature, but also with music and how it all intertwined. And vivid memory is driving back and forth on Vancouver Island between Gold River and Campbell River, because we didn't have a doctor in Gold River when it was being built. And we landed there in 1967 when I was 3 years old. So I had come down with very bad allergies as a child, and we would travel back and forth between Gold River and Campbell River. And if any of you have been there, you'll know you're surrounded by nature, as we are here. But I remember singing in the car all the way. There were always songs we could come up with. And we would have games to do with songs. We would say a word and then have to come up with a song. So for me, those rides back and forth really connected me with nature and music. The other thing is, as you know, I teach piano. And Jordan, who played today on her clarinet, is one of my students. And I have to say that we actually have a lot of nature around us. In fact, what I found out, Jordan, today, well, actually it was yesterday, is we have a family of raccoons that were living right beside the studio. And those sounds, I would be teaching the students, and we would hear this scratching sound. And it appears that these raccoons would wake up while I was teaching. And the other night I was playing the piano on my on my own and heard the scratching sound, and I came out, and here had 3 raccoons sticking their head out, looking to see where this music was coming from. It was really quite a picture. I ran in the house, got my cell phone, started snapping pictures. So it really shows that not just people have a connection with music, but animals do too. And I often will bring, or my cat will come in the studio while I'm teaching, and the kids just love that. So I'm hoping that I'm instilling some of that connection of nature and animals and music, that it's all interconnected. And as we know, music is inspired often by nature. Anyway, that's my little 2 bits that I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That lends another new twist to the story about interconnecting with nature. Thank you.
Some of you know that we live now next to a big park, and it's a community park, so a lot of people leave their garbage in the park. And sometimes I would pick it up, and sometimes I would walk by it. And then I heard a story on the radio, and there was a quotation that said, the standard that you're willing to walk by is the standard you're willing to live with. And now I cannot go through the park without picking up the garbage. And I was reminded of a story by Joy about working with children, because our grandchildren now, it's easy to find a plastic bag anywhere in the park, and so now I go and look for the plastic bag, and they all help me pick up this garbage in the park, and they kind of make a game of it. And so we started doing the same thing at our cabin on the beach. We have big bags, and they'll go and collect all the styrofoam. It's amazing how much styrofoam washes up on just a little tiny bit of beach. But it just makes me think how they watch, children watch what we do, and they'll pick up the garbage too.
Thank you. So many connections and so many stories. Thank you all.